All right. Well, let's get started. As Jason said, my name is Serena. My background is in networking, but now I do pen testing for our continuous pen testing team. And sometimes I'll do pen tests just like on a contract basis. And yeah, so Jason asked me to do this webcast. I picked DNS because I think there's a lot to discuss about DNS, but a lot of people don't really know kind of the full impact that DNS has and, all the complexities and the ways that it might, make you more insecure by not, really kind of like clamping down on certain aspects of it. So yeah, let's just dive right in. I have a decent amount of slides. I think we'll go through them pretty quick. And then at the end, I do have a couple bonus slides if we still have time left over. So all right, we're going to do a brief introduction to DNS. So DNS stands for Domain Name System, and here it is a decentralized system that maps human-readable domain names like google.com to machine-readable IP addresses like this IPv4 address right here. And I'm pretty sure that is one of Google's IP addresses. So that's not everything that DNS does, but high-level overview for the time being. So why should I care? If you are interested in cybersecurity or have stakes in cybersecurity, it is good to care about it because it is a critical component of the internet. And that's why whenever you hear like, oh, what was the problem? Oh, it was DNS, because it really is that critical of a component. And when there are problems or outages, it can be significant. And sometimes it is hard to diagnose. So, and, like a lot of other internet protocols, DNS was developed a long time ago. And so it is pretty vulnerable to cyber attacks, and that can lead to data breaches, data loss, phishing, denial of service, or unauthorized redirection. And we'll get into more of those details in further slides. Now, we're going to cover some of the fundamentals just for people here. If this is your first time really learning about DNS, we'll go through how it actually works, the flows and record types, which can be kind of confusing at first if this is totally new concept to you, or just a really great refresher if you aren't always dealing or looking at DNS stuff. So here I have a domain. We have the HTTPS / www.blackhillsinfosec.com. So we do have the protocol that is the HTTPS protocol, and then the subdomain www, and then our domain name, which is blackhillsinfosec. And then you have your top level domain .com. You also a lot of times see like .edu, .gov, .org, .net. And yeah, so those will kind of be important, but here's typically what you're going to be looking at. And yeah, sometimes you won't see HTTPS, maybe you'll see HTTP. And yeah, so moving along here, this is again, high overview. We have a person. So like, just if you're the average person, what does DNS do for you? If you want to go to facebook.com, facebook.com is not a machine readable address. It is a human readable one that is easy to remember because like phone numbers, it's easier to save someone as a contact under, their name versus remembering everyone that you know's phone number. It's just like unlikely that is a possibility. So DNS really helps with that. When you type in facebook.com and your computer doesn't know where to actually send that request, it's going to send it to a DNS address that you'll have stored in your computer. Then the DNS process will take place, and eventually you will get sent back an IP address that will give you essentially the address for where that facebook.com web server is at so that you can access that. And then you will, get that and then reach Facebook. And so it's kind of like just typical day-to-day stuff. That is really the average person's interaction with DNS, even though they 99.9% of the time don't know that that process is occurring, and it is very quick. So that is a benefit. There are 4 different types of DNS servers that we're going to be talking about. The first one is the, you'll hear it under 2 different names. Sometimes you'll hear it under the recursive or resolver DNS server. That's kind of like your first point. Then we have a root name server, a TLD, so top level domain name server, and then the authoritative name server. So going back to when you want to go to facebook.com, the first server that you are going to hit for DNS is going to be the DNS recursor resolver server. And you might have data in there already cached. And so your resolver might already know the IP address for facebook.com because you've already gone to that website before. It's already stored that address in there. And it'll just give you, what it has cached in its data. But if it doesn't have an IP address already cached in there, it's going to send a request to a root name server. And so that will be the next stop. Now, why is there more than one, or why isn't everything all cached into one DNS server? Well, there's just a ton of addresses, a ton of websites that you go to, and it's just not realistic. Same thing with like routing, if you're familiar with, IP addresses and routing, and how you can't just have like every single IP address stored in a routing table. Similar to that, it's just not very feasible. So your recursor or resolver server is going to ask the DNS root name server. Now, there are going to be 13 servers, or you will hear like 13 types of these DNS root name servers. Why there's 13, there's actually way more than 13, but there's going to be 13 addresses. The reason that this is because an old DNS requirement only allowed a maximum of 13 root servers. And that's just simply not enough with how the internet is anymore. I mean, there's hundreds, if not thousands, but there's a lot more than 13, but there are 13 addresses. Now, what is actually cool, if you are familiar with networking a little bit, the difference between, unicast and anycast is unicast, you are sending your packet or your data to one specific IP address, which is on one specific host. But DNS root name servers actually use anycast. So you will actually be routed to a root server based off of the load and proximity of that root server nearest you, even if it has that same address as, one of those 13 other ones. Now, it's going to accept that query, and then it's going to respond by directing the resolver to the correct top-level domain server based on the extension of .com, again, .net, .org, and you're going to do that same process again. Then that TLDR, not too long, didn't read, TLD, top-level domain, it will respond by giving you a server with that top level domain that will, you'll get it, it will go back, and then you're back. Now you're going to have to get the authoritative server. That's where your last stop is going to be. And that is what's going to give you the IP address that is associated with that domain name. Or in some cases, you will get a CNAME record, which is going to point you to a different domain. And then you're going to go through that process all over again, which obviously is going to take a little bit more time. We'll get into a little bit more why a CNAME record is important and why they're used. But that is, the process will kick off again. You'll start from the beginning. And then, luckily it's quick. Once you do have the IP address, you go ahead and visit facebook.com. Your recursor DNS server will hopefully cache that data. So the next time you try and reach out to that website, you will not have to go through the entire process all over again. And then if that expires, then you'll have to go through it. But yeah, it can be expired out of that cache table on your resolver, or, maybe someone goes in there and removes it, whatever. But hopefully a lot of times it's cached. All right. Now, when we talk about DNS records, there are a lot of records. We're not going to get into all of them. Even this list up here is not a complete list of records, but we're going to go over some of the important ones that matter. The DNS records, the one that we're talking about, where it's like, okay, we have this domain name and then we have an IP address. That's typically going to be in a record. This record is going to contain that IPv4 address. And then there's the for a record. And that one is going to contain the IPv6 address if that is available. So, that's the one that we're probably going to be using the most, what you're probably going to be most familiar with. Now, we had previously mentioned a CNAME record. The CNAME stands for, I think it's, what is it, canonical name, but it points to another domain and it triggers another DNS lookup. It is convenient when the IP address of the root domain changes, but the CNAME record is going to stay the same. So you will just go to that CNAME and you can change this information pretty easily. And we'll also talk about how that can be abused. We have an MX record that stands for mail exchange. It directs emails to the mail server. It's always going to point to another domain, and it can have property values. The lower the value, the priority. Priority values, the lower the value, the higher the priority, and it cannot point to a CNAME record. The text record, obviously TXT stands for text, and it's going to hold a string. There are a lot of information that can be in there. Sometimes it's helpful. So when you are doing maybe some reconnaissance in a test and you find some text records, maybe those might be helpful to you to understand what technology stack they're using, or maybe there's information in there that probably shouldn't be public, but someone may have put that text record in there not really intending for it to be public, or knowing that people do look at those things sometimes. So yes, you can sometimes also see different policies like the SPF policy. And domain ownership verification. NS record stands for name server and indicates which DNS server is the authoritative for that domain. Now, those are going to be the majority of the records that we are going to be covering. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about DNS zones because this will come back up, but a DNS zone is a portion of a DNS namespace that is managed by a specific organization or administrator. So I have an example down here where it says we have bhis.com, which is our domain. We also have CyberRange, which is subdomain training. I actually don't know if we really have any of these. I did not check to see if these were actual subdomains that we have. But then we also could have this blog.bhis.com. Why would we, separate these into different zones? There are a couple benefits of doing this. So you're delegating authority over each zone. So maybe you have a third-party company that manages just your blog website, and you want them to be able to only access that blog subdomain. You can separate those out into zones. It's also good for distributing query load across multiple DNS servers. And if there are changes in a specific zone and you're having issues in one zone, it doesn't kind of impact the other one. And you can create custom DNS records that are zone specific, and it can be used for redundancy as well. Now we're getting into a little bit more of the interesting, I would say, DNS after you get past, just the basics on how it works. We're going to talk a little bit more about security threats. So DNS cache poisoning, DNS tunneling, DNS tunneling, and domain generation algorithm, which is, we do have some use case examples for that too. Now, what is the problem with DNS? Like I said, was made a long time ago, and like a lot of other routing protocols, there isn't a lot of verification. So a DNS record, you can basically send one or respond to, a DNS name server and potentially give it bad information. There's no way for that server to actually verify that that record is legitimate or the sender is a legitimate DNS server. There's no mechanisms for data integrity, so data could be altered in transit. And if you compromise any level of the hierarchy, it can cause mass disruption because it will infect the rest of the hierarchy. And again, with issues revolving around DNS or involving DNS, it can be hard to diagnose or really understand at first what's wrong, because a lot of times there's not clear error messages that the issue is specifically DNS. DNS cache poisoning. So here we have up at the top a threat actor, and this threat actor is going to impersonate a name server. The DNS resolver, right? So this attacker is going to ask this DNS resolver, what is the IP for Coinbase.com? If that DNS resolver does not have that cached, it's going to ask a name server, hey, like, what is this IP? And go through that process again. But this attacker can also send their own response as a name server and inject an IP address that actually isn't the correct or real IP address. This IP address for this, instance, it could be a web server that they're hosting. So when that DNS resolver caches this IP address and another person asks, hey, what is the IP address for, Coinbase.com? That resolver is going to give out the incorrect IP address and redirect those unsuspecting victims to the attacker's website. And this actually has happened quite a few times, especially with crypto websites is like a big one that you will see because a lot of people will, give out their login information. They log in, they store all of, their crypto and it can have a lot of money. So that is a very popular target with these types of attacks. And here, I think this is just going back again, being a little bit more clear. We have this A record that has now been cached and stored with a incorrect IP address. And this is our unsuspecting victim being redirected to the incorrect or malicious website. We also have another thing called DNS tunneling. This is another kind of security issue that you want to be looking out for. I would say this is more popular from attackers from maybe like a data exfiltration standpoint. If somebody is already in your system or in your network, they could use DNS tunneling to exfiltrate data or even make C2 commands and use it that way. So here we have a registered domain that was registered by the attacker, which is nothevil.com. And they are going to, add that A record to this website and put probably like a tunneling malware program or something on that website and, either try and fish someone into going to the website. The one issue with this is that, again, you would already have to kind of have that initial foothold into the environment because the malware is going to need to communicate from that compromised host in the network, in the victim's network, and then you're going to need to navigate to this website so that you can set up that connection. Right here, you can see an infected computer within the target network connects to this malicious website through the DNS resolver, and then you are going to set up that tunnel. And why this works or why DNS tunneling can be kind of a popular option is because DNS typically avoids firewall detection. A lot of times it can be kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack, looking at DNS records because you are sending out tons and tons of DNS records most of the time every day at like a typical company, right? You yourself could probably send out easily more than 100 DNS requests in an hour that you don't even know that you were sending out. And because again, this is all happening automatically and the user doesn't know typically or really care that it's happening. And to go through that traffic can cause congestion. It sometimes is not, it's just not feasible. Some programs really rely on, speed, and it's just not easy to really go through all that DNS traffic. And it's typically the port 53 that is used for DNS is going to be whitelisted on a firewall. So easy to get in and out of the network undetected. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about domain generation algorithm and how this is used and how domain names are used and abused by a lot of times malware or botnets. So what a domain generation algorithm is it is a algorithm typically in a piece of malware that is going to generate a large amount of domain names. These are typically unregistered domain names, because unregistered domains usually are not monitored or blacklisted. So sometimes once a phishing website gets on a blacklist, you burn that domain, you can't really use that anymore. So by generating hundreds and hundreds of domain names that have never been used before, you're kind of ensuring that those aren't going to be blacklisted or have a poor reputation, or be blocked by a firewall. And yes, this is to avoid malware detection that may block specific domain names and static IP addresses. And yeah, and you can also use a domain generation algorithm to encode data. And we will see that in a little bit here with when we talk about SolarWinds and how a domain generation algorithm was used in the SolarWinds compromise. What's also good about this is when you are generating all these domains, it helps avoid attribution because these are unregistered. You don't have to register them, but if you do end up registering them or communicating with them, it's a little different, but it does help with avoiding that attribution. Now, how does this work? A seed that is known to the attacker in the C2 server is basically given to generate these domains. It produces a sequence of characters for each domain. A lot of times it kind of just looks like gibberish that you won't really know what it means, just a bunch of letters. And again, domains can be unregistered, likely unmonitored, and it's just used for evasion and communication. What's nice about this too is an attacker can quickly change to another domain if one of them is detected and blocked. So if you're generating hundreds of them, it's kind of like whack-a-mole where you get one, but they already are onto another one versus, if an attacker were to hard code one specific domain and you find that one domain and block it, they're kind of out of luck, right? You've basically eliminated their ability to communicate with that malware and, continue their foothold within that environment. Reconnaissance, we're going to talk a little bit about too, zone transfers and DNS enumeration. This is going to be good for testing if you are a pen tester or, trying to do some reconnaissance on, your customer. There's a couple different ways that you can use reconnaissance to help. Zone transfers is one of them. There is a file, as we talked about, like an A record or, an MX record. There's another record that is the asynchronous transfer full range record or file, but it's basically a protocol for zone transferring. How we talked about before, if you have, zones that are managed differently, configured differently, and you need to replicate that zone across different DNS servers. We have a lot of duplicate data on DNS servers all around the world. And if that data, all that data that is in this file is all of the data that is, relevant to that zone. And that can be a lot of really good information that you can use on a test, and maybe even get information about the customer's internal environment. Or if you are from a blue team perspective, an attacker could use this to potentially get a lot of information about your internal network, about a lot of the other domains that you might offer or have exposed to the internet. This is helpful because you're broadening your attack surface. If I have, 3 websites or 3 web servers to try and, get myself into your environment, that's low. But if I open it up to like, oh, okay, well, now I have like 500 because I was able to, use this record to find all of the ones that you're managing within the zone, then that really increases my chances of being able to, compromise. And yeah, so why does this protocol exist? Why wouldn't you just turn it off or whatever? Typically, this is, again, for DNS servers to communicate to other DNS servers and, share that information in the places that it needs. But it can sometimes be exposed unknowingly to the public, where not just a DNS server can take it, anyone can take it. So you do want to lock down kind of like those IP addresses that are allowed to actually communicate and be able to transfer this information. We also have DNS enumeration. So if you can't, get a hold of this file, do zone transfers, which is a lot more unlikely. You might come across it every once in a while, but like I said, a little bit more unlikely. You also have kind of a backup option, which is DNS enumeration, which is still helpful in broadening your attack surface. What you're going to be trying to discover is DNS servers. You're going to look for subdomains, potential internal IP leaks. I've definitely seen this on tests, and that could, give away some information about your internal network, like what your Active Directory server IP address is and what your naming convention is. And you can also get like email server information. So maybe you want to try phishing or see if there's any type of bypasses that work against a specific provider. This can be helpful information. I did list a few tools here. There are a lot of different tools to do different DNS enumeration. DNS Dumpster is just like an online option, but then you do have like AMAS and DNS Recon that you can use. I think those are both. I don't think AMAS is a Python. It might be. There might be a version, but I know DNS Recon is a Python script. So, and some of these are a little bit more complex and verbose than others. Depends on kind of what you want or are looking for. But this is definitely a really helpful step in the reconnaissance process. And we're going to talk about a couple case studies. Now, I brought up Solarwinds earlier, and what happened was, if this is the first time hearing about the Solarwinds attack, it was a supply chain attack where an attacker gained access to the victim's network, the victim's networks using a supply chain attack on Solarwinds. So the supply chain attack, they basically embedded malware into kind of just like their normal development process for the software, which was pushed out to updates, which was then pushed out to a lot of other customers. And then, now the attacker can use that malware or that backdoor that they created to gain access and initial holes into a lot of these environments. It was a really big deal. And part of the interesting aspect of the SolarWinds attack and these Sunburst malware was how they used DNS and a domain generating algorithm. So they use this domain generating algorithm to hide their C2 traffic. And here we see that the domain that they used was avsvmcloud.com. So this is what basically you want that malware host to reach out to this domain. So you can set up that communication between the attacker and the victim. Now, they use the DGA specifically for the subdomain portion, and this subdomain portion was encoded, but after you decoded it, you would see that it included the user ID of the compromised system and the system domain. This was helpful information in a way that the attacker can decode that information, look and see what victim is communicating with you. And then from that point, you can kind of decide, is this something I want to go to kind of step 2 in this communication process? Or is this not interesting to me? I don't care about this specific computer or this specific customer. So this was a way that they were able to essentially just cherry pick what systems they wanted to communicate with and wanted to spend their time on. So I don't know if there was another any type of malware that had used that before, but this seemed, in my opinion, pretty novel and pretty interesting. And yeah, like I said, hacker decoded. And once they decoded and decided like, yes, like I would like to communicate, I want to go to the next step in this process for exfiltrating data or infecting, spreading more malware within that environment. The attacker then added the domain that was generated here to a CNAME record. They put that CNAME record out there so that when it reaches that victim's computer reaches out, it will redirect them to the correct C2 server that they will establish that communication process for C2. And yeah, just an interesting way how they use a DGA as a method of control. Next, okay, DNS Sink Hole. I thought this was going to be interesting to bring up too, because this was another piece that was used in malware, but also in Pi-hole, which I know a lot of people use and is a common way that a lot of people use DNS Sink Hole. So in WannaCry, the malware would query for a hard-coded unregistered domain. The domain's down here. Obviously, you can see it's just a lot of random looking letters. And if the domain was registered, or if the domain wasn't registered, the malware would continue and encrypt the computer. If the domain was registered, then the malware essentially would just stop. It would stop executing. And by registering this domain, it essentially stopped the whole thing from, continuing to wreak havoc and encrypt additional computers. So that was kind of an interesting way how that was used. I'm not entirely sure why they did it that way. You do kind of want some type of kill switch in malware, because you could accidentally infect computers that you didn't intend to. Malware can get out of hand, especially when you're looking at kind of like the more advanced nation state actors. They want a more controlled and quiet attack. They want a lot more granular control, because as you can see, when things get out of hand, then you might look bad. When security researchers start looking into this, someone's going to notice that this is an issue. If you are using a 0-day, you burn that 0-day because then patches are going to come out. And so, yeah, typically you don't want to do that. So you want to have some control over how the spread of this malware, and a kill switch for you to use. And this was, for this instance, was that URL, that domain. And then I think there were some other variants that used a different domain, and then those domains were seized and, yeah, under control by, someone not going to use those for nefarious purposes. Now, a DNS sinkhole also is Pi-hole. If you're not familiar with that, it is basically a Raspberry Pi that blocks ads. It does this by having kind of like this block list of IP addresses that are known for associated with different advertisements. And it is essentially setting up a record in your own, kind of like little DNS resolver that says, hey, I want to go to this website. So when you go to a website that has ads, those ads are going to send out a query to display them from that ad provider, right? And if you have that in a block list, you're just going to say, don't reach out to that, right? It's not going to reach out to that. So that ad's never going to actually come up, because you're never fully making that connection. So this is a really popular way that just a lot of common people use DNS sinkholes. All right. Now, DNSChanger, this was interesting, and I wanted to include this because this was a DNS hijacking Trojan. And like similar to kind of Pi-hole in an interesting way, they use this to essentially change the IP address for these hosts so that they could inject in their own advertising. So it was a company, an Estonian company that, made this malware and was being distributed to, I think at one point it said was like over 4 million computers were infected with this type of malware. And this company was named Rove Digital. They made a ton of profit by injecting their own ads into these ad spaces by having this DNSChanger use their own DNS resolvers that would essentially give them IP addresses for Rove Digital ads. And the FBI raided them in 2011, which is a lot later than I would have assumed, because typically there was a history of, at one point, of a lot of companies installing malware or rootkits on just customers' computers. Like Sony did that. And that was kind of a little bit earlier. I would say it still, I think, was pretty, deemed not ethical and wrong at the time. But when we're talking about like the early 2000s, I think that the rules were kind of a little bit different back then. And people didn't really know that, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't let random companies install rootkits on your computer. But yeah, so this happened in 2011, which I thought was kind of later than I would have imagined something like this happening, especially with its, a company to serve up their own ads. And they made like 14 million in profit. So that was an interesting way of how they use DNS to essentially exploit and make money. There are some mitigations to some of these DNS exploits. One is DNSSec. It is the domain name system security extension. So changing protocols is almost like near impossible once these are really well established. Getting anything changed takes forever, a lot of time, a lot of manpower. So DNSSec is not used everywhere, or I don't even think a majority of the time. But it is an option to add additional on top of DNS. That's why it's a security extension to kind of help create a more secure environment where you're making sure that the information that you were receiving in these requests have not been altered. So here we have DNSSec creates a secure domain name system by adding cryptographic signatures to existing DNS records. By checking the signature, you can verify that the requested DNS record comes from the authoritative name server and wasn't altered en route. So it essentially authenticates the responses to these domain name lookups and prevents attackers from manipulating or poisoning any of the responses to the DNS requests. There are more records, DNS records now with the association of DNSSec. We'll go through a couple of them. I wanted to add these on here. I think I could do an entire talk on just DNSSec, but we'll do a little bit so you kind of understand the idea of how this is working. Something new with DNSSec is called RRSets. So on a server or within a zone here, you have, let's say, the subdomain example.bhis.com, and then you have kind of these records for that. It's going to clump together all of the same record types and the same name and put this into just an essentially like a stack of papers, like a set. And these sets are, confined to each zone. So these are zone specific. And what happens with this set now is that you're actually going to go ahead and sign these with a private key. So DNSSec uses zone signing keys. And the private key, once it signs that set, it is going to put that signature in a new record type, which is the RRSig record. And then that record is going to be stored on the DNS name server. Now, next part is since it is a zone signing keys, we have two keys. We have a private and a public key. So with the public key, you are going to use the public keys to verify the signatures. Those public keys are also going to go into their own record and be on being stored on that same name server. And I didn't update this here. It's not the RRSig record. It's going to be this DNS key record, essentially. And that public key verifies the signature. So when the DNS resolver asks the name server for a particular domain or record, it's going to send this RSet and then this RRSig record together so you can then see that signature. Then you will be able to see how it sends those back. Then the DNS resolver is going to request that DNS key, and you will be able to use that DNS key to actually verify that all of these records have not been altered or changed and are coming from the correct name server. Now, the problem with this is that if you trust the zone key, then you should trust these records. But what happens when the zone keys get compromised? There's another set of keys called a key signing keys. And yeah, that I didn't put in this specific presentation because I was worried about it going too long. But there are a lot more mechanisms in place with DNS security to be able to kind of verify that these records are correct. There's also explicit denial of existence. So if a record doesn't exist, it will, give you that information explicitly so it can't be abused, which we'll learn about a little bit later. There's a chain of trust, and then also delegation signer records. So these are kind of interesting things that are now included within DNS security to kind of make that whole process a little bit more secure. Like I said, not everyone is using this yet, but there is like an increase. But like all new things, like there's going to be a flaw, right? So with DNS security, DNSSec, there was a CVE. This is just one example that I thought was kind of interesting to show like, oh, hey, even these, newer protocols that are meant to provide additional security can have their own exploits too and aren't necessarily foolproof. So there is a CVE called with a name called Keytrap. It's basically this exploit where a single DNS packet can cause a denial of service by making the DNS security validating DNS resolver do calculations that overtax the server's CPU cores. Because there is an encryption aspect to this, there is a math aspect to this, and in this case, what basically the DNS resolver is instructed to do when it's trying to validate these records and compare the keys and signatures is that the name server should send all the available cryptographic material, and then the resolver should use any of that material they receive until the validation is successful. So if you are sending information that it just cannot compute, right, it's too much, and it will essentially cause a denial of service attack because those CPU cores are going to continue to be locked up in that process of trying to verify this file, while other files are not able to be verified because they're waiting in queue. So that one's interesting. They did resolve this problem. I think they, the researchers who found this exploit did work with a lot of the DNS providers to patch, this flaw. So before it was released, I think all of the issues were kind of taken care of so that it wasn't able to be exploited on a, mass large basis, because that could essentially really take down a lot of the internet. I would suspect that that would have been kind of really tragic. So thankfully it didn't happen, but I'm sure that there are other CVEs and exploits that are going to be coming out about even the more secure options, and just be on the lookout at those. Don't always put 100% of your trust into any of these fixes. There also, there is DNSSec, but there's also DNS over HTTPS, and then there's DNS over TLS, yeah. And DNS queries and responses for like the HTTPS option are sent encrypted with either HTTPS or TLS, and attackers are not able to forge or alter the DNS traffic. What are the big differences between using HTTPS over TLS? Well, they use two different ports, and there are two different RFC standards for each of these. But the also is from an administrative standpoint, there's a lot less visibility when you are doing DNS over HTTPS because you are not able to actually monitor any of the DNS requests that are going out. They are encrypted versus some firewalls and monitoring that you do or inspecting will look at these DNS queries to see if it's querying any suspicious DNS or, like domains. So you can kind of block those. But in this case, it is not possible to view those. So that is a consideration that maybe someone might use TLS because they can still kind of inspect that traffic if you are worried about communicating with these malicious domains. Now, the last slide here that I have is just some tools. This is not like a comprehensive list, but definitely interesting tools to kind of look at. There are some ones that you use more mildly every day, or, if you're on a test, like Whois, NSLookup, Dig can be, really great for finding files, finding IP addresses. And there's DNS tool. There is Iodine, which you can use for DNS tunneling if you are doing a test, or, maybe you're doing some type of C2 activity that can be helpful. So yeah, take a look at those if you are interested in exploring some of these DNS tools to either use on a test or use against yourself. To kind of see where you are with your DNS security. Now, I do have questions, and then there are 2 slides. I don't know how much time we have left for, I guess, I think we should have time left. Jason? But I can definitely answer some questions.
Hello.
Oh, you're echoey.
Serena.
I'm echoey?
Yeah.
Am I echoey now?
Test.
Test.
Fine.
Okay.
For you, maybe.
Serena, take a breath.
Okay.
Well done.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Good job.
Did you
Yeah.
learn something, Jason?
I did. I was listening, but I was also tagging all the people who did hack it.
Mm,
I was
got
doing
it.
it.
cool.
Your voice is so soothing. I was just lulled to sleep with the
Yeah.
sounds of DNS.
Serena, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Can you please do a talk about creating slides? Because these are some of the best slides I've ever seen in my entire life. And a lot of people agreed with that as well.
Oh,
Great
yeah.
job.
Thanks.
What do you use again? Do you use Canva or?
Yeah, I use Canva. I was gonna ask if y'all could add me to like the work Canva subscription.
Oh, sure.
Cool.
Yeah, do it
Now
live.
that
on
I'm
Webcast.
asking in front of everyone, so you
know.
can't say no.
Mom, can my friends stay over? They're
Uh.
right in front of me.
Yeah.
Questions. Yeah,
So-
if you didn't get your question, you can go ahead and ask it again in the Discord and we'll ask Serena.
Also, if you haven't done the Hackett, if you go to the Hackett check-in and post your sticker, we'll make sure that we give you credit. Had a few people hit their 10s Hackett, so they got a reward. It's going to be mailed to them in the mail, and we actually send it pretty much everywhere in the entire world. And so we'll do that for free to say thank you for being here, for engaging, for being a part of this community. Serena, I have a question for you.
Sure.
It's the question I ask every single tester.
Mhm.
And I apologize in advance. I ask every tester this question. And so while we're waiting for other questions to come in, I'm going to ask you this one. On a test,
Mhm.
when you're doing a pen test
Mhm.
and you feel like you're not making any progress, do you assume that they have good defenses, or do you assume that your skills need more?
That she sucks at her job. Is that
That
what
she
you're-
sucks?
Probably both. I would say that mainly because a lot of stuff that I do is like internal, external networking, and I don't have as much experience in like the web app side. So sometimes I'm like, oh, I'll use that opportunity, like if I do have some time, because occasionally too, you'll get externals that have just really small scope. You know, maybe there's like 10 endpoints and they're just kind of not very exciting or don't have a lot of externally facing stuff to go off of. I use that time to, you know, maybe learn a little bit more about web app testing and try out some web app stuff. It's typically what I do. But yeah, it depends. Like if I was on an internal and I was like, oh, I'm not finding anything, then I would be like, oh, I got to work on myself. But sometimes, yeah, small scope can impact that a lot.
Appreciate that. For the people asking about the Hackett on Discord, so you have to go to Discord and you can find that link in the resources channel. Like at the bottom, you see resources button, goes to Discord. If you have a verified phone number for security purposes, then you can post inside Discord in the Black Hills Discord server. All right, Serena, a question here from how do DGA domains get pushed into the root servers?
They will be added because they're essentially the attackers are adding these records. So they'll find them when it's requested, because that request will still go out to the domain servers.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. But yeah, they'll essentially just kind of choose and pick which ones they want to then register and communicate or set up that CNAME record.
Someone here says, I have a fundamental question to clarify. What is the difference between SSL and TLS? Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh gosh. I know you should not use SSL anymore. Just TLS. I don't know the specifics. It's just like a more secure standard, but I don't know the specifics of it. But SSL is like kind of deprecated.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Whenever I got
TLS
in,
is the replacement for SSL. It's the new version of it. It's a standards track version. So you're right. SSL shouldn't be used anymore, and TLS should.
Well, the TLS 1.2 and 1.3 should be used.
Yeah.
You're fair enough. Exactly. So the TLS standards are also being retired. Too true.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, I was backstage and I was like, I know the answer.
I know this one. I know this one. I know the feeling.
Here I come.
Okay, well, this is one of the cool things about working at Black Hills is that not everyone needs to know every single thing at all the times, because there is a team of people. And so there's every time you're on the test or in a situation, you just throw it in the chat and you will get people who are humble and knowledgeable and they will share their knowledge back. So,
We also have something fun called team hacking, where we get together and hack our clients. Anyway, sorry, continue on.
okay. Okay. What's the base level of security do you recommend for protecting DNS in a small business network?
I I don't really know how to answer that specifically. I would say that just make sure that you have like good like DNS hygiene. So one of my bonus slides here talks about like subdomain takeovers. So if you let a if you are using CNAME records or let a domain expire, but don't remove the record, an attacker could use that register that domain name themselves and then basically have control over that domain so that when someone tries to go to that website, that CNAME record will direct them to now the attacker's web page or web server. And I would say, yeah, like that's just really being consistent and cleaning up records that aren't necessary. And, you know, making sure that you are, especially with, you know, zone transferring, you have specific IP addresses associated with other DNS servers that it can communicate. So it's not just handing over that information to whoever requests it instead of just sharing it with other DNS servers.
In theory, if you only use the IP address for the websites you want to visit, could you avoid blocked DNS altogether?
It gets a little bit more complicated because a lot of times IP addresses can change, right? Information changes. That's why CNAME records are popular. And I think you will eventually have problems. But yeah, you could bypass that if you are using just like a specific IP address to connect to something. But you could also it wouldn't be easy for many reasons.
The big downside for trying to go directly to an IP address in a web browser is you can't use HTTPS anymore. You can't get an encrypted website to a specific an IP address. You have to have a host name. And please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I mean, I was thinking about if you add the socket at the end, like for the port, you know, I think you might be able to. I don't know. I'd have to.
Okay. I don't know how you would get a certificate for it. That's the part that I'm lost on. Cool.
Yeah,
I believe you though.
No, I like I said, I'd have to look at that because I've never really interrogated that. But yeah, that's interesting. What else was I gonna say? There was like another point. Oh, well, another reason why that probably wouldn't be really good is because from an internal, like if you're just at home and you're like, oh, I want to go to Twitter or X, whatever, and you type in the IP address, you know, fine. But at work, or if you're managing an internal network environment doing IT there, Active Directory relies on DNS a lot. Like a lot of things rely on DNS, not just like, you know, web browsers. So that would be kind of almost impossible to use IP addresses for everything because a lot of these systems that are working together are using DNS as well.
Yeah. And if you're like, who's Bill? Bill, you're a part of Active Countermeasures, which is another tribe here at Black Hills who creates AC Hunter. So you're on the AC Hunter team, which is network threat hunting tool. So
and AC Hunter definitely depends on DNS as well. So keep using DNS, please.
Yeah.
Serena, I have a question for you because you know one of the things that we do when we hire people to come at Black Hills, we always talk about like, do you like to share your knowledge and why do you like to share your knowledge? So I always like to ask Serena because you started like you are just a content creator. You create content all the time. You're always teaching people something. Like, why do you like to teach, Serena?
I think that one problem that I've always had in tech or, you know, along my journey, especially like networking in college, is that I always felt like the explanations that people were giving me just like weren't good. And maybe it's not that they weren't necessarily good. It was just the way that they were explaining it didn't really work for my brain. Right. And so I was always explaining these things for myself and, you know, kind of having to like take what they said and then, you know, compare it to a book and then really start connecting my own dots in a way that made sense in my own head. And so that's, I think, why I do it, because I just do it naturally. And so then it's easy for me to give out that information because it's kind of already there. And then I'm like, hey, look, like I think this explanation might work for you if the other ones don't.
Mm.
And I've always appreciated how you just like naturally want to share your knowledge with others. Like essentially that's how we found you in the first place, because you were creating
Yeah.
content and sharing your knowledge with other people. So,
Mhm.
all right. So to start wrapping up things, what are, it's a question. So it's not like
Mhm.
wrapping up things, it's a question. What are some considerations with testers, attackers sending non-standard requests or information over port 53?
So I guess it depends on like what you mean non-standard, like just without DNS, because there are other I think there are other things besides DNS that use port 53. So it really depends. I mean, if it gets a request on that port and it doesn't know how to process it, then you'll probably get an error.
All right. Load balancer. Last question.
Hmm.
Is that a question? No, it's a comment. Let this be the last question. In cybersecurity or hacking, do you feel there will always be knowledge gaps that have to be closed?
I think there's like every field knowledge gaps. And the really difficult thing about security and networking and technology in general is it's impossible to know everything. Most people are going to kind of find their niche and really specialize in a specific area and focus on their strong point. I think it's important to kind of find well-rounded teams that can complement each other's skills. And I think that's how you ultimately fill knowledge gaps, is by finding those well-rounded people and making sure it's like, oh, well, if I already have someone on my team who's really good at Active Directory and knows all this stuff, but I want to add another person on the team, it's like, okay, well, ask, maybe that person's like, hey, like what thing do you not like to do or don't feel as comfortable with? And then finding that new person who has those skills and adding them to the team.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for joining us today. If you have anything that you'd like to share inside Discord, feel free to do so. And then Serena, if you were to wrap up everything with just like, if you took everything and you're like, here's the most important thing I'd want you to take away from this one webcast today, what would it be?
That DNS is very important to the internet and you should know about it. And yeah, so you don't forget about DNS. That's it.
Don't
Probably.
you forget about DNS? No,
No.
no, not a.
Is that how you want to end? Is that
No, it's not.
want to end like
Okay.
that?
Thank you so much for joining us for this Black Hills Information Security Webcast. If you are currently looking for a pen test, red team, threat hunt, ActiveSOC, anti-SOC, or anything that we can offer in 2024, now is the time to reach out to us. And that's not like a get down here now, prices are going crazy. That's not what this is. What this is like our sales consulting team, essentially the people who receive your inbound request. This is the time where they're not as busy. After the July 4th holiday, that's when they get a lot busier. And so if you would like to get ahead of time, now's the time.
Mhm.
And with that, Deb, Zach, Bill,
Yep.
Ashley,
This has been
and
great.
especially Serena, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Thank you all for joining us today. And hopefully you join us next week for the Incident Response Summit that Anti-Siphon is having. And then a week after that, Jack is going to be here and he's going to talk about email or something. All right, everybody. We'll see y'all next time. Ryan, kill with fire, sir.
Kill it.
Come on,
Bye,
Ryan.
guys.
Come on, Ryan.